My name is Dave Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence. My goal is to explore the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. In addition to leadership, I like to discuss mental health, PTSD, and overcoming adversity. If you have a favorite episode, I would love to hear about it. Message me through social media or my website, and I will share some free tools to help you achieve your goals. Please like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you haven't purchased your copy of my book, Fireproof, please grab a copy today. Thanks for listening. Today, I'm speaking with Angie Morgan. She is one of the authors of Bet on You. And also, there's a couple other books that she has written that are New York Times bestsellers. She is a former Marine Corps officer, a dynamic, creative thought leader who knows how to unlock the capability and talent of leaders at all levels. You know, some of her leadership abilities, her skills, that knowledge base, in the beginning of her book, Bet on You, they talk a little bit about that experience and how they developed as leaders. And I'm saying they, Angie co-wrote Bet on You with her friend and partner, business partner.
Courtney Lynch, yeah.
Courtney Lynch, okay. With her good friend, fellow Marine Corps officer, co-authored Bet on You. And let's see, some of her experience comes from being a special advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on diversity initiatives, and engages routinely with boards and organizations to drive performance. She's an avid athlete, and her competitive nature and motivation to win shows up in every client engagement as she inspires others to be their best. And I'm thrilled to be speaking with you today, Angie. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. So welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dave. I'm really happy to be here. I love what you're doing.
Thanks. Well, let's start off in the beginning. Where were you born and raised, and what were some of your early influences?
I grew up in northern Michigan in a really small community, and it was very much so, not to date myself too much, but I think that some people are like me among your listeners. This was all pre-internet. And so my fast pass to this outside world was reading. I was an avid reader growing up, and I read everything and anything I could get my hands on. I particularly loved biographies and autobiographies. And so really just learning about people's lives has been a true fascination for me. But through the process of reading, I realized that there's so many experiences I wanted to acquire. One of them being that I wanted to go to a large university just to experience diversity. We're a very non-diverse community up here in northern Michigan. And I say up here now because I moved back here eventually later on in life. But again, not very diverse. I just wanted to experience culture and just the benefits that can bring. One of the earliest influences was definitely my dad. He served in the Marine Corps. That experience in his life was one of the transformative, and I know this just because of how he revered his experience. And we would go see his buddies who he'd served with, and the camaraderie that they had was just palpable. And I was always just very curious about it. And so when I went to the University of Michigan, which was a huge leap for me. I mean, even though it was only 3.5 hours away, it might as well have felt like a different world. It was a different world, Ann Arbor than Kalkaska. And he introduced me to ROTC, and he knew that I wanted to be an English major, and that there were and I didn't really want to teach, and there were no real English factories that I could go work at. And so he's like, well, why don't you think about the military to get some life experience? And the way that he revered his experience in the military got me started on my journey to look at the Naval Reserve Officer Training Program, specifically the Navy. But as soon as I got there, I mean, I was kind of a sucker for the Marine Corps, mostly because I'm an athlete. And that didn't intimidate me. In fact, it challenged me, and I really, struck a chord within me that I actually wanted to do this.
Do you have any siblings? Are you an only child, or?
Yeah, so I had an older sister, and that was not going to be like, she was into beauty pageants and things like that. So that was not even a possibility as far as my dad was concerned to ask that of her. And I did have a younger brother. He passed away when he was in college, but so he had thought about the military too, of course, but it was really just me. And it's funny because I have two sons, and one is a senior in high school, and he's thinking about the Marine Corps. And I see that for him. And in my youngest son, I don't see that in him, like as part of it. And so I feel like there's this relationship, this call to service. I can definitely see it for my oldest and my youngest. I'm like, yeah, I don't think it's going to be for you, buddy. And it's not because there's anything, wrong or off about him. It's just that I feel like, military finds people, people find the military, and it's a really, it's an interesting relationship. And I would never want to push that on anybody, but sometimes you see
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. And, um, there's people that have that, I don't know, that way about them where you could just picture them in military service, but if not there, maybe somewhere else being of service and in their own way. And so I'm interested. Did your father serve as an officer?
No, he enlisted actually. He enlisted right before the Vietnam War, and he was in the first wave in 1965 going into Vietnam. And so that's possibly the reason why he wanted me to be an officer. He's like, he went to boot camp and he's like, everybody's yelling at us and getting screamed. He goes, then an officer walked by and everybody stopped and they saluted him. He's like, who the heck is that? Like, who could be more important than the people yelling at me that they will stop in their tracks and salute? So it was funny. He's like, I'd go in as an officer. And he was actually like, I'm not even sure women could join the military. He's like, I never saw a woman in the Marine Corps. I hear that they can. And that was where his mindset was. It's
So,
funny too, because my oldest son is looking at the military service and he's really torn about which direction to go if he wants to do something right after college. And I think, or right after high school, or go to college and go to the officer ranks. And I think we've got this interesting generation of kids who, after a couple of years of a pandemic, want to do something with their life. Like they just want to, feet first and do an experience. So it's definitely interesting.
you said you got involved with ROTC, and so did you do ROTC all the way through your 4-year degree?
Yeah, so I didn't have a scholarship my first year. It was sort of my trial year to see if this is what I wanted to do. And then I earned a scholarship. And then upon graduation, I earned a commission. And it was really nice, actually, my senior year in college, having that sense that I knew what I was doing, because a lot of my friends were still trying to find internships and jobs and were very, very nervous that year of their life. I was very excited because I knew exactly what I was going to be doing for the next 4 years. In the sense, I knew I was going to go in the Marine Corps. I didn't know where I was going to get stationed and what I was, going to be doing as a job. But that gave me just so much security at that stage of my life and allowed me to really enjoy my senior year in college. Because the year I turned 21, so that made
Yeah.
it really special.
So, and did you get your MBA while you were in the Marines, or was it
Oh, yeah.
after?
That was much later. In fact, I didn't go back to school until 2013. And so that's a significant gap. Like I served 4 years. I left active duty actually 10 days before 9/11, and then started my private sector career. Started off in pharmaceutical sales for about a few years before starting Lead Star with the woman I served with in the Marine Corps, Courtney Lynch. And so we've been building our business for 20 years. And I'd say about halfway into that Lead Star, tenure, it just dawned on me that our clients were asking us to do more consulting and business consulting and strategy consulting. And my background was, Marine Corps, English major, pharmaceutical sales. I didn't have a business degree, and I felt like it was almost irresponsible not to have a business degree if I'm going to be advising businesses on business strategy. So I went back to school at like an executive MBA program, and it was great. It was one of the best things that I think I did for my career at the time, mostly because it introduced me to a whole bunch of really cool people at this stage of their career where they wanted something more. Rarely in life do we have a chance to reset our professional network. And that was just awesome.
I'm curious about your time in the Marine Corps. you finished your bachelor's degree, and then right after that, did you go to officer candidate school? Is that how that works?
Yep. So I went 6 months to officer candidate school. And then after that, that's where you get your, well, I'm sorry, you go to officer candidate school before you graduate college. That's like 6 weeks in the summer between my junior and senior year. And then after college, you go to 6 months of what they call the basic school, which is also another officer school, but it's really like the fundamentals of being a platoon commander. So that's a 6 month school, and that's where you get your duty station and then your job. So I was going to be stationed in Hawaii, which was like awesome, and I got the job I wanted, which was even better because if you're rarely in life in the Marine Corps do you get everything you wanted, and I felt like my luck had run out entirely. So I got the job, I got the duty station, and then you just kind of wait to get your job training school, which is only a couple months. Then I spent about 3.5 years in Hawaii.
Wow, that's awesome.
It was awesome.
What an adventure. Now,
So much
th-
fun.
one of the cool things about the Marine Corps that I've always loved this about the Marine Corps is that regardless of what your job is, first and foremost, you're infantry. You are trained in combat arms, and I just, man, I just love that piece of the Marine Corps that it doesn't matter where you're at. You could be a cook or, you know, I don't know, a store clerk kind of person,
Public
like
affairs
doing logistics.
officer. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Every Marine's a rifleman. It's I don't really talk about that qualification in my current career, but you're absolutely right that everybody is trained to pick up a rifle and essentially do whatever you have to do. And I will say that if we're calling in public affairs people to be on the front lines, we're in heaps of trouble, but we can do it. We can do it. And yeah, it was really, to me personally too, it was one of the hardest things I think I've ever done. And it wasn't necessarily the physical aspect of that 6 month school. It was from an ego perspective, one of the hardest things I've ever done, because I was used to flying through college, flying through life without having to really work hard. and and this was the very first time that I've ever, and I mean, I worked hard, but I never felt pushed and stressed beyond my abilities. This was the first time when I just was really challenged with what we were learning. And contextually, like I didn't grow up with G.I. Joe, I didn't grow up with rifles. We were outdoors people, but that was like cross country skiing. So I was never into hunting and fishing and doing all those things. And suddenly we're doing all of these activities. And it took a lot just to keep up and barely pass. And there were many times in that experience where I wondered, like, gosh, do I really have what it takes? I thought I was good. And I had a really great mentor who pulled me aside one day and just said, listen, everybody's struggling with something. He's like, I get it. You're 5'3". You are a small person. When we go on these 20-mile marches, you have to practically run to keep up compared to the 6'2" guy. But there are things that are much easier for you than other people. So just know that everybody has their struggles. And that was really illuminating for me. It may not be the same struggle, but everybody is going through something. And I think that sense of unity and connection, that it wasn't just me and my ego that were struggling, it was a lot of people and a lot of people's egos. I mean, you want, for Marines, probably the work that you've done in the past too, like you want people to have a pretty strong ego, but you don't want it to be so strong that you can't be humble and pick up the lessons learned and really be coachable and
Right.
developed.
Yeah. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but
Oh, be humble. Or be humbled. It's true. It's true. I was definitely humbled. It took me a while to realize, like, oh, there's a lesson here that my ego is preventing me from picking up. But I've picked it up.
well, I've been so that phrase was shared with me years ago, early on in I guess when I was really moving into a leadership position in the fire service, and I felt like I was ill prepared to lead some of the people that were uh, there already. People that had more time, more experience, more education. I'm like, why in the world would they follow me? And a good friend of mine started sharing leadership literature with me. And one of the things that he told me was, be humble or be humbled. He's like, I use that phrase all the time. And so I've used it in my professional career, but it wasn't until recently that I really explored that and what it means to me, because as I've moved into a different phase of my professional life, there are people that have much higher level skills than me that I've had to say, hey, and they've a lot of the individuals that I've been coming into contact with recently are just so eager to help me uh, get to the next level. And I've always been the person that's helped other people achieve. And now it has been a humbling experience. Like, like, no, I'm at that level where I need to accept this help. And
I just had a conversation with somebody. It's one of my coaching clients. He's a senior sales leader in an oil and gas company, and he's really trying to develop his team. And I'm like, have you asked them for help? And he's like, I'm here to help them. And I said, well, let me ask you this. Change his name. Jim, I've got a problem. Can you help me? And he's like, Angie, of course, I'd love to help you. I said, okay, how did that feel when I asked for your help? He's like, oh, great. Felt like I had something to offer. I'm like, there you go. You're giving your team a gift, like asking them for help. You're actually, we think so much like, oh, it's going to share the weakness, it's going to be vulnerable. But what you're giving somebody is a gift. Everybody wants to help you. They just sometimes need to be asked and be taught how. So I love that you're talking about that from a humility perspective. It does take some humility, but what you discover is that when you ask, people just rise to the occasion. They take care of you. That's kind of not necessarily our nature, but I think it's part of this human connection.
absolutely. Well, tell me a little bit about your relationship with Courtney. How did you guys meet? How did you then decide later on, because she was in the Marine Corps a few years after you left.
Yeah, she got recalled after 9/11. So we actually went to training together. So the 6-month course where we were both kind of fumbling through, kind of discovering what our paths were going to be. We went through this period. She was a public affairs officer. She was stationed in Japan, which doesn't seem close to Hawaii, but if you're in the Pacific Rim, you're kind of close to each other. So we would see each other, and our friendship really formed through those experiences. We left active duty, and then during that time, I was working in pharmaceutical sales in LA. She was eventually became an attorney. And I think we were both just really unsatisfied with our careers. And it wasn't because we were making money, we were making really good money. I think what for both of us was missing just a sense of mission and importance. Like when you're in the Marines, you're not making hardly any money, but you feel the work that you're doing is important. And so I think that was that united thing. And then we also were noticing our experiences in the private sector, specifically what was really relevant about our Marine Corps experience. Like we had learned not just this leadership vocabulary, but just these behaviors that, gosh, if everybody, thought about setting the example, holding themselves accountable instead of placing blame, served others, really thought about taking care of the people around them and saw themselves as that being a priority role for them, or not like losing their cool. If there's a crisis, just being able to be level-headed and how to build credibility with people. So we kind of had these multiple ongoing conversations where we're unhappy, service is missing, we see these observations, there might be an opportunity here. And we decided that we were going to start to write a book, in which we ended up completing. It took a long time, from the idea to actuality. Again, in your mind, you're like, oh, this will just take the summer, we'll be done. And then the reality is like, wow, this is a 2-year process because it took that long to complete the task, right? Anything seems easy from afar. As you probably know from your experiences too, like from afar, anything looks easy, but you're doing it and you're like, oh, this isn't at all. But we found an agent and he said to us, I really love your project, but I'm not going to take this on unless you have something to go with it. Publishers don't really care about the quality of your work unless you have an audience. He goes, maybe you guys should start speaking on leadership. And we were really lucky in regard to the fact that we had solid foundation of support that we could in our mid 20s leave our paid steady jobs and transition to write and then build a speaking business essentially was what it started off at that stage. I mean, I was able to do it because I had no kids at the time. I had kids shortly thereafter, but I had no children and I had a spouse. So I had this nice little income support. Same with Courtney, no kids, and her spouse. Actually, her spouse was um, in the fire business for a little bit too. He's a fireman, and now he's a police officer. So public service runs deep in their family as well.
Wow.
So we were just really fortunate. And then we started shopping our concept around. And a few of the clients, our very first client was Walmart, which is great because if you can claim that as a client, other people say, okay, you're legitimate. You do have a business here. Then the book came out and it was a different book market. Military leadership books about 20 years ago were a new thing. Right now, there just seems to be a heck of a lot more of them. So we just had a really unique niche that we had a book, we had a speech that became training programs, that became consulting. And now we spend most of our time coaching and doing keynoting and workshops on occasion. And not as many because of COVID, I think, as once before COVID, but it's been a real joy to start relaunching training and development packages.
Now, did you publish Leading from the Front and Spark with Courtney as well?
Yeah, all my books, we've been co-authors on.
Oh,
So
wow.
Spark came out in 2016, and then Bet on You just came out.
Yeah. Now, let's dig into Bet on You a little bit. Going through it, uh, there's so much usable content. There's just all these nuggets, and you are working on yourself as you go through the book. And I one of the very first things is the play it safe paradox. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it's funny you said, you're working on yourself as you're going through the book. I was working on myself when I was writing the book in the sense that our business got massively disrupted because of COVID. We lost a ton of business because we could no longer travel by air and speak to people in large audiences. So that created the opportunity, though, for Bet on You. And so writing about risk and having to take risks, there was this really interesting therapy involved in the process. And one of the things that you're talking about is how we open the book and just this really interesting perspective that we have on risk taking, because most of the lessons that we acquire early on in life are don't do this, don't do that, have a plan B, don't, and we think about this fairy tale stories. If you don't do what your mom tells you, Little Red Riding Hood, stay on the path, your grandma's going to get killed and you might get eaten too. So we have all these things like, okay, I better follow the rules. I better play it straight. But then you get to a stage in your life where the rules just don't work for you. The guidance, as well intentioned as it was meant to be, doesn't really fit the vision that you have for yourself. And we call that when agency takes hold. So you go from the passenger seat to the driver's seat in your life. And suddenly you want to do things that are a little off road, and people around you are like, you're nuts, don't do that. But you're like, but that's really what I want to do. And I get it, nobody else is doing it, but this is where my heart is driving. And that's the play it safe paradox. We're taught to play it safe, but then the paradox is it no longer is going to help us live the life that we feel we're intended to live.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions about risk?
And we write about that too, because I think a lot of people hear the word risk and they're like, I don't take risk. And we're like, well, really? When was the last time you went to the doctor? You take risks. Or what about that unhealthy relationship that you're finding yourself in, or that conversation that you're not having that needs to be had? We take risks all the time. We may not call them that. And so one of the things that we wanted to do in the book was just really like demystify risk. Like, what are we talking about here when we say taking risk? It's really a decision followed by action that leads us into uncertainty. And when you say it that way, you're like, okay, I guess I do take risks all the time. And then the misconceptions that we wanted to confront are that first, people think about risk as the opposite of reward. Like it's the downside of a choice. It's the bad thing that's going to happen if the good thing doesn't happen. And that's just not true. Like, I bet if we were to say, like, what are some of the best risks that you've taken in your life? Maybe for you, it was walking into that Marine recruiter's office and then going to the Navy and starting off that. I mean, that was a risk and think about what happened. It didn't necessarily turn out the way you wanted to, yet it opened up these other opportunities for you. So it wasn't the opposite of reward, it was your path to reward. And I think about, going to the University of Michigan, or even, some of the bad choices, or we'll say bad choices, there was something good that came out of it. So that's what we're talking about. And I just think about moving forward. So that would be the number one thing is, we think of risk versus reward. It's not. Risk is the path to reward. The second is that we think about risk in big moments, like jumping feet first in something, taking the leap. And the way that we talk about it, it's like, no, that's risk done bad. That's why we love as a society 90 Day Fiance. Like those are really big, bold risks. And those really represent bad choices. That's not sustainable. It's not realistic. It's not how success happens. And so we think about risk as not as a leap. It is a series of incremental steps. You think about an idea, and a great example. February 2021, my husband and I went to Key West, and apparently there was no COVID in Florida at the time, so we could walk around pretty freely and, look at life differently. And we had this idea of, because we saw people carrying around sippy cups, and we had this amazing idea like, oh, it'd be so much fun in our hometown. We live in a resort community of doing something like that. We just saw how much money could be made at like sippy cups, shots in it, but we got back to our community and started brainstorming. Well, that's not going to work. Let's look at the revenue model. Let's look at the spreadsheet. Okay, this isn't going to work. So it was about 7 months later, somebody came to us, a friend of mine, said, we're putting our coffee shop and pastry business up for sale. Would you guys be interested? And that had nothing to do with sippy cups, tequila, walking around Key West. But because we had done the work and thought process, it just made sense. So last year we bought a coffee shop and bakery, and it's been a great experience. So again, series of steps to take that risk, and we never know what the outcome is going to be. Yeah. The final thing is like, we think we can avoid risk, but as we just discussed, we can't avoid risk. It's like thinking that we could have avoided COVID. That was my joke earlier, but we can't avoid things. I mean, things happen to us that we don't even like, we're all just one phone call away from some really bad news. Like we can't plan for everything. So risk is present in our life. And if it's present in our life, wouldn't it be best to know a little bit about it than to say like, oh, I don't take risks? Like, well, you do. Let's learn about it. And let's figure out how to use this quality to advance yourself in life and help you achieve the dreams that you have for yourself.
How does you wrote about something called the kaleidoscope approach, and how does that relate to risk?
That goes to the idea too, that we tend to think of risk as in business, but we're trying to help people see their lives holistically. And so it's not just risking in your career. So imagine a kaleidoscope. What makes it so beautiful is its balance within all the different chambers. And what can make our life beautiful, like a kaleidoscope, is having a little bit more balance in all of those different chambers. We're multidimensional people. So not just our career, but what about taking risk for our family? Maybe that is like taking a tech-free vacation might be the biggest risk you can make for your family, but maybe it's the best need. Or, really trying to reintroduce technology rules for your kids because you feel like there's a little bit screen time. There's risk, there's a relationship risk, but maybe that's a risk that you need to take. One of the biggest deficits I've seen in adults, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is joy. Like I meet a lot of people who are just joyless, like they don't have any fun in their life, and they just don't plan for it. And we want people to plan for joy. The final thing is risking for impact. What are you doing for other people? We're part of a community. You have to give up something to me to get the benefits of community. So what are you doing to serve those around you? You don't have to join the military or join the fire service or be a policeman, but what are you doing to make your world a little bit better for others? So yeah, what do you think about that risking for joy? Do you know too many unhappy, joyless adults?
Yes, and it's awesome. I tend to have these conversations, and I find that most leadership gurus, that really get it. They understand the importance of self-leadership, but the idea is that self-leadership leads to personal development that then allows you to add so much value to the people that you're leading, to the people that you love, to the people in your community. And one of the things that I really enjoy talking about is, when we're trying to figure out our purpose or our, what's the meaning of life. What does it all mean, and why are we here? That kind of thing. I feel like we're all seeking that joy, that happiness, um, that pure form of like fulfillment, you know. And the the example that I like to give, and that's more relevant to people that have kids because I use this story of trying to teach my daughter something and her struggling with it, and then when she finally achieves what she was trying to achieve, and maybe I'm viewing this from afar or see her on stage or whatever it is, but it's something that I gave of myself to help her achieve something. It wasn't for me, it was for her, all for her. And that sense of fulfillment when somebody else gains because of the work that you've done, I think is the purest form of happiness and fulfillment that you can have. And I think that's what we're seeking.
And I feel like as a society, that's the massive deficit that we have, especially with some of the mental health issues that are going on. And we see them on the front lines of our business just for the nature of our workers. These are non-salaried professionals, younger, and have been, I don't want to say kept in captive for a few years, but their lives were really, really small. And so it's like rebuilding those skills of service to others. Because to me, as a coach, as a leadership coach and helping people achieve success in whatever pursuit that they're seeking, I get more joy from that than anything that I do, because there's something about fulfillment in there's just greater emotional connection to the fulfillment of others and the things that you do. And it is something that you're doing, right, by championing, supporting others. But yeah, hear you entirely.
And that, I mean, it's ancient wisdom. I mean, humankind has been sitting around campfires talking about this since the beginning of time. Why are we here? And I think everybody really, if we can dig in deep to that and understand that we are all here for one another, we can't really survive if we're self-centered and egocentric and we're just driven to add to ourselves. We'll be miserable. We might have a lot of stuff, but the happiness isn't there.
Yeah, we don't need more miserable millionaires in this world. We need to, yeah, people committed. Yeah, you definitely speak in my language. I get that entirely.
I've had this conversation with a couple of different people that like environmental safety or occupational safety or organizational safety, but in the book you talk about three guides and three elements to your safety net. Can you talk a little bit about that?
This ties to the fact that we don't want people taking reckless risks. Like if you only have $10,000 in your savings account and you take your entire savings and invest it in, a franchise of sorts, that may not be a responsible risk that you take at that stage of your life. So we recognize that one of our safety nets that we have is just our finances. So before you do anything that will require a financial investment, really get intimate with your finances and make sure that first off, you have the resources you need. And second, because you see this too on the opposite side, that you don't necessarily have more than you need. I think sometimes people overinflate what they need to take a risk and just get really comfortable with the fact that, these are the scenarios. There's something in the middle. And so looking at your finances that way. Another safety net that we need is our judgment, which is our ability to make sound decisions. We can only have so many firsthand experiences in life, but we can always develop our wisdom through the experiences of others. So as we think about the choices that we're going to make that are, riskier in nature, going to, help us pursue our risks, making sure that we seek out people who are more informed than we are and learn their lessons before we make the call. Then I think that's part of like being a part of a community. People want to help you and they want to share, especially their lessons learned. And so listen to them and take heed. You're asking, and it's a wonderful thing. But the final thing that we want to remind people is that the strongest element of your safety net is your talent. And you have that going into any endeavor that you have. So you're not starting something new from ground zero. You have your experience, your wisdom, your judgment, all these things that you're bringing to your party. I read a story in the book about going through a divorce, and throwing me into some serious questions of, do I still want to own a company? Should it be time that I do something a little bit, quote unquote, responsible in regard to get traditional employment with benefits and things like that? And it really dawned on me that I've been self-reliant for many, many years. I may have lost half my, investments or half my, estate, quote unquote, but I still had 100% of my talent. And so reminding yourself that is that your talent is your greatest safety net is really important when you go about there. And so thinking about it, like your resources, your talent, and your ability to make sound decisions, that's the thing that's going to catch you if you fall.
I coach a few people here and there, and I'm in a couple of different masterminds, and I get to work with some really talented people. And one of the things that I've noticed about a lot of them, they're these high achievers, is that there's a level of perfectionism, that they want everything to be they're pretty hard on themselves, when they don't get it perfect. And you talk a little bit about it in your book. How does perfectionism limit us, when it comes to taking risks?
It slows us down. And I think we spend so much time planning and waiting for the sun, moon, stars to align that inevitably we never take the risks that we want to take. And that runs then the risk of living a life of regret. We have a piece of guidance in the book, save your perfectionism for never, because nothing is ever going to be perfect. In fact, it's going to slow down your progress. We advocate in the book for, thinking about making decisions, the 1/3, 2/3 rule. So 1/3 of your time should be planning, 2/3 of your time should be doing. If all your time is spent planning, you're going to get no experience and you're going to develop no experiments to see what's working and what isn't working. So plan less, do more. And plus, if you're in the doing phase, you're in the learning phase. So you're able to really assess the validity of the choice. It's like, thinking that you want to start an Etsy business. And so maybe you focus so much on building, your products for your website and they're never going to be good enough. And my advocacy would be, well, let's just get an Etsy page, put up a couple things, get some customer feedback and see where we go from there. Like you're worrying about things being perfect when you just don't even know if it's viable yet.
One of the things that caught my eye was the effing cousins.
Fear and failure. Yeah. It catches a lot of people. We get some really interesting comments about that. Some people are like, how dare you? And it's like, well, I get it. But we're Marines, so you can't really blame us for that. I think the F word in the Marine Corps is like it's a noun, it's a verb, it's an adjective, it's an adverb. It's just part of your vocabulary. We just get comfortable with it. But it's not the same thing, but they swing in the same circles. Fear is real and it's okay to feel fear. I mean, you're a fireman, that fear is something that you have to process and do what you need to do anyway. And so often when we feel fear, we focus on catastrophizing what failure looks like, which is not really good actually, because it's going to get your attention and focus, and worst case scenario probably never is even going to happen. So if you're thinking about though the downside of your choices, give the upside of some choice too and try to give that a little bit of attention and airtime as well. So acknowledge your fears, process your fears, figure out how you can navigate through them, and great. And then the fear failure. I think, if I were to bring 100 people into a room and say, what did you learn more from, your failures or your successes? They would say hands down failures, wouldn't have changed them for a thing. Okay, well, that's great. Then why should we be afraid of them? I'm not saying go out and fail every single day, just saying it's going to happen. It's like life. It happens. What are you going to do about it? And move past it and learn from it. It might sting, it might hurt, but it's an experience that you can process and build from.
There's so many things floating around in my head right now with regard to that, because I struggle with that fear of failure. And I think most people do, but it is one of those topics that I taught in the fire service. When I taught leadership, I always taught people to, when you're in a stressful environment, when people are looking to you to make decisions, don't be afraid of failing. If that causes you to pause and not act, it's essentially the same as failing.
Yeah, no decision is worse than a bad decision in those situations, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So true.
So for all those listening, uh, and I'm sure that people listening are going to want to buy this book. Once they read this book, they're going to want to check out your other two books. And organizations that want to have you come and speak. What now that the world is opening up again and people are bringing in speakers again, how would people get in touch with you? What's the most effective way for people to get in touch with you and hire you for your services?
Oh, well, thank you for that. And I hope, right, with Bet on You that people do get a chance to check out the book. It has a free online companion too that allows you to create what we call a risk manifesto. Consider it like an online vision board about what's next in your life. So it's really good. It's got great questions, a chance for you to put some thoughtful answers to it. And then you print it out and you're like, okay, this is the must-do task list. I need to really honor the work that I put into it. So there's that. And if people want to stay in touch with me, certainly email at angie@leadstar.us. Or I publish a lot on LinkedIn. And so under my name on LinkedIn is Angie Morgan Witkowski. This is a risk that I'm taking. I remarried and took my husband's last name. So I'm going from something simple and fun, Angie Morgan. I was Captain Morgan at a time, which was awesome for spice rum drinkers in the world. But now it's Angie Morgan Witkowski, which is a big Polish last name. But that's where you can find me on LinkedIn.
All right, cool. And I will have a link to your website in the show notes. And I noticed that there were links to your social media on there as well. So everybody can go right to the show notes and click on that. It's easy enough and find all your books. And best of luck to you and Courtney.
Hey, best of luck to you too. And we'll certainly share this on our social channels as well. So I appreciate it, Dave.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please visit hollenbachleadership.com for additional content, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review.